helped remove the barriers they have for transportation. They were more likely to, show up for their appointments or at least log in so we could talk to them. And we also found they're a little bit more comfortable when they're in their home talking with us. They're more open to discussions, and we learn more about them from that. So again, with some of our populations, we learned virtual appointments is okay. Same thing with treatment groups. We had to move our treatment groups. We didn't want to sit stagnant, not providing treatment during this time, so we went virtual. And some early returns from our treatment groups is we have seen an uptick of 10% in our completion rates of our Iowa domestic abuse program. So we're seeing a lot of good results from this, and we'll continue to build upon this. We'll have hybrid models. We'll use it with some populations, not others, but I think this was an opportunity again for us to grow and learn that, hey, it pushed us into it. There was a growth opportunity for us, and we learned that it can be very beneficial to the populations we serve. So also during this time, we grew in our understanding, okay? There's been a lot of national rhetoric about the use of prison. And we have felt for years that in the 6th district, we use prison appropriately, okay? We don't feel like we overuse it. But we really wanted to get evidence to show that. So we listened to help with Sarah, where she's at. I called up Sarah one day and said, Sarah, we know our judges trust us. We know our public defenders trust us. We know our prosecutors trust us. And as a result, they put people on probation that maybe somewhere else go to prison. And they know that we'll intervene, we'll hopefully intervene before a new victim is created. So what Sarah's research showed is that someone who is sentenced in the 6th district is 1.5 times more likely to end up on probation than go to prison. Did I say that right? All right, yeah. So she's got a report there that she did for us, so I just wanted to share that with you. But again, I feel that's because our judges trust us, and so we've got data now that supports what happens. We don't want to use prison any more than we have to. Prison has a purpose, but we don't want to use any more than we have to. And so the other national rhetoric I think that's going on too is that if you would listen to everything you hear, we're just jamming the prisons full of people for technical violations. Something as simple as a missed appointment. Something as simple as a curfew violation or not paying the fines. It doesn't happen. It does not happen here. And so one of the other data points we pulled forth was less than 1% of the individuals that are on probation get revoked every year for technical violations. And I want to tell you, as a probation officer and talking to probation officers, we have to have technical violations because typically when we're going to ask for revocation on technical violations, it's because they're one step away from creating a new victim. And so again, I'm going to call on Sarah because she created an early alert program, which is in the process of honing this in. It's going to help our agents. Our agents have good knowledge and good experience, but this is just one more step, one more tool for them to say, oh my gosh, these 3 or 4 things happen. I need to intervene and see which direction we can go. And just because we intervene, if we even have to intervene with incarceration, it doesn't always necessarily mean they're going to prison. It means let's get them in jail, let's sit down, let's sort what's going on. Did they get off their medication? Are they abusing a drug? Can we get them away from that, get them a little stabilized and bring them back to the community, put them in our halfway house, or are things so deteriorated now that they gotta go to prison? So again, I think you'll see that we don't just revoke people to prison because we're mad at them. People end up going to prison from the 6th district is because they're high risk and we fear them and we don't want new victims created. So a lot of good time to reflect and grow an understanding of the work we have and make sure that everybody's aware of that. We do a lot of marketing and we do a lot of discussions with our community partners so they understand that. I mean, it really dawned on me one time when I was talking to a public defender, this was years ago, and I was a supervisor over at the residential facility, and she said to me, does anybody ever make it through your halfway house? And I'm like, from her lens, they probably don't because she's dealing with the ones that are down there are getting revoked because they brought drugs in, and they're doing stuff in the community they shouldn't be doing. But somehow I need to get the information to her that she needs to understand the number of people that are successful that come through our halfway house. So anyway, again, in the 6th district, we're agents of change. And I know the term recidivism comes up a lot. You've heard about it a lot. And you're going to hear me say this, as a lot of people out here have heard me say this before. I have recidivism fatigue. Quite frankly, I'm tired of talking about recidivism, and here's the reason why. It's a negative term. It puts things in a negative light. And if I go to my staff and say, we really got to decrease the recidivism rate, you're telling me I gotta take something negative and make the negative smaller. I wanna talk about the positive. We're talking about successes. We have on our monitors out there the number of people that successfully completed probation last year, the number of people that successfully completed probation in January. That's what we really wanna hone, and we wanna increase that rate. Rather than talk about reducing recidivism, let's talk about increasing people that successfully complete probation. So, I gotta tell you a quick story. You got a challenge coin there. This is a challenge coin that we gave to our staff after the pandemic. Unfortunately, that's not the first challenge coin we've had to give our staff because of a natural disaster. Back when we had the flood of 2008, you know how hard Cedar Rapids got hit with that. And when I was giving out the challenge coins for the pandemic, I told somebody who had been here for both of them, kind of jokingly, you know, if you get a third challenge coin, I've talked to IPers, and you get to retire early. And I said that before DeRachel. So Bruce ate some crow over there and had to go to staff member and say, I really didn't make that agreement with IPers, but I just, you know, as an agency, as a district, the resiliency of our staff is just absolutely incredible. When you consider the flood, you consider the pandemic, and you consider the DeRachel. I mean, if you're not familiar with what happened in Cedar Rapids, it just, I still sometimes when I go to a neighborhood, I look up and just think like someone took a weed whip and cut the tops of all these trees off. It's just absolutely devastating. And we had people that came together in this campus that still continue to provide services, work with our residential facilities when they had no electricity. So it was a very challenging time, but again, I'm very proud of staff and the way they pulled through it. So I want to conclude my remarks by saying I'm really proud of our DOC and DCS system. I want to take a moment and compliment staff at DOC, everybody that's here, Sally, Beth, Sarah, Steve, everybody that's here. In all my years, I've never had so much cooperation and openness. I mean, Beth might not give me the information that I want to hear, but at least she's given it to me. And then it's my job to figure out how to deal with it and how to navigate it. Same thing with Sally. Being able to pick up the phone and talk to Sally, and Sally can say, okay, here's the reason why this is happening, we can do this, but we can't do this. I'm like, okay, now I understand. Whereas before, it wasn't there as much, so I really do appreciate them for doing that. You, if you're still on the board next year, you're gonna get an invitation from us because it's gonna be the 50th year anniversary of the 6th district of the DCS system. So we want you to come back and we wanna celebrate, and we're gonna do a lot more telling our story because that's important for us to do. That's a great time for me to transition because I'm gonna have Laura Straight, our assistant director, come up here because she's gonna tell a little bit about our story and our kind of our marketing campaign about being agents of change. Because I think it's a very powerful message and something that we do here that we're very proud of. So thank you very much.
I thought Bruce was gonna say it was his 50th birthday.
I wish.
Good morning. Well, Bruce stole a little bit of my thunder, but I'm going to get into a little bit more of the weeds about how we approach our work and our philosophy. So here in the 6th District, we are agents of change. We're very proud of that. This is not our final branding. We're in the process of working on a new brand, but we did make these because we really wanted to ignite some discussion and some energy around that concept. So what do I mean when I say we're agents of change? We honor our obligations to community safety by facilitating behavior change in those individuals entrusted to us for supervision. We believe it's our fundamental purpose. And a few months ago, I think you had the honor of hearing from a couple of our shining stars, Danielle Bailey and Danielle McWilliams, about our use of CR2. You'll be hearing from a couple more of our stars this morning as they highlight our sex offender program. This is really about how we conduct our work. So I want to start with our philosophy. In community corrections, we recognize that we exercise a substantial amount of discretion in the supervision process. We also recognize that it's this discretion that's probably at the heart of the national debate and the narrative around criminal justice reform. We also recognize that in order to contribute meaningfully to the dialogue about reform, we have to create a better understanding of our work, our philosophies, and our approaches to this work. Our call to action is really to articulate the tremendous value that we offer in the context of community safety. So in some forms, probation parole officers are portrayed as thoughtless actors. They're just kind of waiting back, waiting to detect violations, trip up their clients, put them in custody. We really challenge that assertion. That's not Iowa's approach to this important work, and it's certainly not the 6th District's approach to this important work. Here, we are agents of change. We promote transformational interactions with our clients. We assert that lasting community safety comes by way of real-world behavior change, that important intersection, that important point where clients really internalize new cognitions and new ways of problem solving. We believe we are most impactful by teaching our clients new ways of problem solving and creating productive pathways for them. We embrace our roles as human service providers and active partners in this change and reintegration process. We demonstrate our commitment through the intentional use of interpersonal skills. There's formal training that we've had regarding core correctional practices, motivational interviewing, research-based tools, and by tailoring the application of services with cultural sensitivity and through appropriate sequencing and dosage of services. As agents of change, we recognize that relationships matter. In correctional literature, there's increasing evidence that the manner in which probation and parole officers interact and engage with their clients and deliver programming can bring about reductions in new crimes and victimization. According to the research at the University of Cincinnati, there was a 30% improvement in client outcomes attributed to quality interpersonal relationships. Here we wear two hats. We often call it the dual role relationship. You may have heard it referenced sometimes. It's that balance between cop and counselor. What it really means is that appropriate balance about accountability, but care and concern. Research suggests that when we place substantially more emphasis on one of those orientations at the expense of the other, outcomes are unfavorable. We attribute our successes, as Bruce has highlighted earlier, to our effective staff and our committed staff and the balanced orientation and the way that they approach this work. Here, our skilled practitioners establish high-quality relationships. Those are characterized by respect, concern, empathy, and providing a voice, like giving their clients some autonomy in decision-making and guiding that decision-making. Here, our skilled practitioners also balance that with high-quality structuring skills, where there's pro-social modeling, effective reinforcement, problem-solving, service advocacy, and brokerage for clients. We utilize human-centered approaches, and we demonstrate an ethical application of our authority. We are thoughtful in our approaches, and we embrace our obligation to continue to tend to process and technique. We've also been very intentional about promoting this orientation through our training, through our skill practice, through hiring and onboarding. It's just so important that we're assessing how someone views their role and their understanding of the ethical use of their authority when we are hiring and onboarding staff. We're making some important shifts that we think really demonstrate and support our commitment to this. Bruce highlighted some of them before, but the first thing is highlighting our successes, really demonstrating our value in terms of community safety. We are referencing those under supervision as clients and individuals, not defendants and inmates. We're adapting our intervention offerings, which you'll be hearing a little bit more today from Rob Metzger. Advocating for the use of incentives in the supervision process. An example of that is our promotion of merit-based discharge. Developing success plans with our clients, not management plans. I think that another important thing is we're looking at barrier reduction. You know, how do we deliver our interventions? How do we make that more accessible for those that have transportation barriers or live in rural areas? And really being willing to study that and be honest about our effectiveness and where we need to make it to speak to their hearts and really needs to represent the energy and the power of, to make change that they have. So recent initiatives also include our tending to our internal culture with more emphasis on employee well-being and recognition of the cumulative toll of trauma and traumatic exposure. We envision a culture where people feel significant and recognize their actions make a difference. We know that healthy, happy, engaged, and thriving employees contribute to healthy, happier, thriving clients. Again, relationships matter. It's all connected. Here at Community Corrections, we have an important story to tell. This is an opportunity to uplift the voices of those we serve, humanize the space in which we work, and illustrate the fulfilling nature of this work. And we also know it's complex work, and we cannot ever lose sight of the serious safety considerations. We are all stakeholders in our desire to make our communities safer. Here, we are agents of change, and we're proud of it. I now have the pleasure of introducing Rob Metzger, and he's gonna overview our intervention programs. Thank you.
Thank you.
I have extra t-shirts.
Morning, thank you everyone. Thank you everybody for coming. Bruce referenced that we haven't been too idle during the pandemic, and that's very true, and in line with what Laura's talking about with the agents of change. One of the things we've really focused on is our intervention and the overall structure and the system in which we approach our interventions for working with our clients. And so early on, when we sat down to evaluate what we currently had and where we wanted to go, we came to a realization pretty quick that the solution was pretty simple, but also very big. And like a lot of worthwhile goals, that's often the case. Historically, what we've done with our interventions for our clients is we've taken care of our obligations in terms of IDAP programming. Obviously by code, court order, we have to do those things. And then basically with whatever resources we had left over, we would offer other programming and enroll clients into those kind of as needed based on circumstances and situations. And quite honestly, a lot of times that was pretty reactive. It was in response to a violation or in response to some other adverse circumstances, as opposed to a situation where we're really pushing the value of the interventions as something that everybody needs, because we know our clients come to us with a wider range of needs and concerns, and they need that help. So what we arrived at pretty quickly, honestly, is to get to a stage where all of our clients at our case plan, so levels 3 through 5, will have at least one primary intervention throughout the course of their supervision. And this is in line with what we know with the research in terms of dosage principles, where people need between 100 and 300 hours of intervention if we want to see the significant outcomes that we're striving for. So with that, we kind of worked our way through this and decided, we really need to flip the script a bit as far as how interventions work as well. So we felt it was very important to front load the interventions into the supervision experience. There's a couple of reasons for that. One, we need to establish early on with our clients that this is important and this is going to be part of your time with us. The other part of it is, why would we wait to deliver this thing that's going to help somebody? Why wouldn't we want to get this in front of them and to give them the benefit of this information and these experiences as early as possible, so they can be successful as early as possible and maybe shorten the length of their stay with us. So that's really where we've arrived at, is a model now, and really with tremendous support from central office, where when clients come to us on supervision, they go through the typical probation intake process. We establish their level of supervision. Once we know that they're going to be a case plan client, they immediately go into an orientation group. And that's about four sessions, and that's done virtually. From there, we establish some of the basic principles that we're going to work with in more detail as they get into their primary intervention. And they're routed to one of 4 different interventions based on what their needs are and what their level of supervision is. And that's 4 currently, but it's going to expand, I think, over time, but trying to make this reasonable to begin with. So, but we're looking at applications of the active principles, and we've got an ACT-based primary intervention group for a lot of our folks, relying heavily on T for C, moving on, and STEPS. And these are all programs we've used at different times in different places in the agency and throughout the system, and seeing a lot of really great results with them. So now we're arriving at this point now where at some point early in their supervision, they'll do an intensive intervention program, which will be about 6 months in duration on average, targeted things like psychological flexibility, challenging those criminal thoughts, developing pro-social skills, just relationship building, developing pro-social connections, all these things that we know make a lasting impact. I guess in closing, we've also really worked really hard on our data collection here, and we've got a new but quickly growing data collection group. We know our outcomes matter, and so you'll see that. We thank goodness for Sarah, because she's bailed us out more than a few times and helped out with quite a few stuck phone calls where it's like, help us get through this. But we're also looking at that with regard to the intervention expansion, because to go from a fairly small population to literally everybody getting these interventions, we want to measure what happens. And so we've applied for a grant with ODCP to provide that evaluation. So fingers crossed, next fiscal year we'll have an independent evaluation. But whether that comes through or not, we'll definitely be continuing to ramp up there as well to make sure that we're able to report back and share some of the additional outcomes we're getting here. So, any questions for us?
Thank you, all three of you, for your presentation. I just sit here and I get really energized by what I hear, and I'm wondering, I will never learn everything about CBCs, but my question is, what kind of interface do you have with other CBCs, you know, so you can share ideas? And I mean, is there a regularly scheduled kind of meeting, or, you know, how can we make sure that all our CBCs are benefiting from each other?
The directors have monthly meetings, and I can tell you, especially during the pandemic, we weren't able to always meet face to face. In some ways that was better because we got used to emails and Zoom meetings. And so I know quite regularly if something pops up that I think is innovative, like the survey that we had when we did with clients, as soon as that came in, we wrote that up. I sent that to all the directors and said, here, this is proof what we do matters. So they can see what we're doing here. And conversely, there's some things that they're doing that we're not doing that they'll send out an email. So the exchange of ideas not only happens monthly, it happens in between meetings. I know Jerry Evans in the 5th district, he really takes the lead on data. He's got a whole different program that he works with, and he shoots us with data reports all the time. And same thing, I get those and I'm like, oh wow, this really does tell a story. And sometimes I have discussions with Sarah, it starts to tell a story that you need to dig in deeper to find out why this data is the way it is. So yes, we exchange as much as we can. The thing that's always important to remember about the CBCs, different districts have different challenges. I think about Amanda Milligan in the 2nd district. She has so much rural area that the way she has to do things is different than we have. I mean, I was a probation officer out in Tama County. You have one substance abuse agency. And if the person burned their bridges with that, you had to get really creative about how you got them to treatment. Whereas in Cedar Rapids, you know, we have 4 or 5 different options for people to get substance abuse treatment. So every district has different resources that leads to different challenges. So, and that's why sometimes outcomes are different. You know, we have good, Rob has established a real good network with our mental health providers here in town. We feel like we probably get services quicker maybe than some other districts are able to get them because of the relationship and the resources. So,
If I could add, relationships matter. That's my pitch today. So statewide, those relationships matter, and a number of us serve on statewide steering committees, and we're working with our counterparts in the other districts. The leadership forums that IDOC sponsored, it's a way to bring us all together. And I think when you really get to know each other, you put those faces to names, it really enhances cooperation and sharing, and, you know, helps us make sure we're all kind of paddling in the same direction. So I think our networking here across the state of Iowa is very strong, and it's something we promote, you know, from an administrative perspective. We want our staff involved. We know they can, number one, meaningfully represent the 6th district and, you know, contribute to the, you know, successful discussions and planning. I mean, like an example, Mindy's on a statewide steering committee for sex offender work, so the districts work pretty collaboratively in those ways.
We also have, we've been bringing together the wardens and the district directors and we just did this about a month ago, bringing the wards and district directors in the same room and discussing different things and challenges and how to best work together. One thing I can tell you that came out of the meeting was very helpful as of recently is, you know, the issues we're having with recruitment and retention. Everyone went around the room, everyone learned what everyone else was doing around recruitment and retention. And I saw different wardens taking notes and directors taking notes and that. So I think it's important to make sure it's a system we're coming together and that the CBCs are not separate from the DOC, so we're bringing them together too, to have some discussions about how we can improve as a system. Those have been helpful.
Yeah.
I have a question, and the question is kind of like a comment. So I love what you guys, all three of you guys were saying, and it seems like it's a really, you guys are having an effort through the derecho, through the pandemic, through everything that's been going on in these last 3 or 4 years, or mainly the last 2 years. You said something about inmates, some of the, not inmates, but clients sending in cards positively, and, you know, and that means a lot to me to hear that someone that had an issue will send in a card and show their thanks, you know, thanking you, thanking the system, thanking the DOC for helping them. But is there any chance that you can recruit some of the ones that sent in a card and get them to come back and help the ones that's going through what they went through? Is there any way we can try to get those guys to come back and just speak to some of the new, challenging, clients?
Yeah, I mean, that's an excellent point, and we've done it sprinkles here and there. Like when we did a tree planting and we made our anchor center a women's center, we actually had a client who successfully completed come back and talk about kind of our ribbon cutting there. My dream, pandemic puts everything us back 2 steps. I wanna create a prison industry in the CBC system. And so my dream, we've started a honey system here with bees and everything, and there's ideas that will grow to. My ultimate dream is to have someone who comes through. Now, employment is easier than it ever been. In my 32 years getting people in employment, but it still has some challenges. And I just envision that day when someone's gonna come through, they may not find something because it's not a good fit. They get involved in one of our industries, and it's them. It's the perfect fit. And we put them kind of in a lead worker position for that. They discharge from supervision, and then we hire them back to run the program. And those are the kind of things we envision here, but what you're saying is excellent. We are gonna be doing a survey here, more of a survey, with the populations we serve about other experiences beyond the pandemic, and through that, there might be some opportunity. We've already talked about our 50th anniversary, bringing people in to speak to that. Yeah, so there's lots of things like that we need to build on.
Because I believe that what would happen is if someone sees a success story, they will want to be successful. They will say, I can do it, you know, I've been through it. This person has showed that they can beat the odds, you know. And so I think that's where the developing success plans come in. You know, when you get those success plans and say, okay, we can get together and try to figure this thing out. Not everybody's gonna be negative, but you're gonna have the ones that we're gonna probably have to lock them up, you know,
Yeah.
and for a while in order to get the point across. But there's gonna be some ones that willing to change and come back and help some others.
Yeah.
But we gotta help.
We have a navigator with the drug treatment program too, still.
Yes.
We've had one
Peer
before,
support.
peer support person who successfully completed drug treatment court and comes back, is involved in the process, and works with people in it to explain how they're able to get through it, and they can recognize stuff sometimes staff can't recognize because they've been there before. So we do have a program like that. And just to build upon it, I mean, I was talking to a PO yesterday over in a residential facility that I know is coming upon retirement, and I was in there chatting with them, and we just kept on a roll. Next thing I know, I was in there for an hour talking to him. I'm like, oh boy, you got work to do and I got work to do. I could talk to you all day, but he told me he was up at Quick Trip the other day, and some guy walked in, pulled his mask down, this was in the last couple of months, and said, you're one of the good ones. And he said, I couldn't really remember who he is because this guy's worked for us for 30 years, a number of people. He went back and reflected on it, tried to figure out who the guy was, but he said, you know how that felt for that guy to say that to me? He said it was just, it's so rewarding. So yeah, you make a good point. I mean, we need to capitalize on it more, because I think that would be good for staff too.
Mr. Keller, you speak to the power of the mentoring, and we do have a formal partnership with RISE, which is a reentry initiative here, and adult mentoring is one of their components. It is something we're working more on developing. It's sputtering. I mean, we're not getting the traction that we want, but we recognize that, and again, relationships matter. So that who else better to help a client through than someone who's successfully made it through, so, but we are working on that.
I think it would bring a safer community, because just what you said, Bruce, is that when these inmates or clients, when the clients see someone that's working in the DOC or the corrections department, they don't attack them afterwards, or be rude and, go after them. So that's awesome about relationships. I'm talking a lot, everybody, but this is interesting, and I really thank God for what you guys are doing.
Yeah, thank you for that comment, because we also, in one of our advisory committees, we're starting a project called the Humanizing Campaign. We're trying to basically humanize the populations we serve, and so one of our strategies is we're working with the local library. And if you've ever heard of Human Library before, where rather than check out a book, you check out a person, and they tell you their story. It might be someone who's a refugee, it might be a recovered alcoholic, it might be someone who's a recovered meth addict, it might be someone who lives in poverty, it might be a single mother, and it might be someone with a felony conviction. And so we're working with them on that, and during this process, we're working with the League of Women Voters, and they said, you need to do a humanizing campaign with your staff too, because you guys, I am astounded at the work you do there, but the general public sometimes doesn't see it that way, depending on who's painting the brush, who's painting the picture. So the humanizing campaign really takes twofold. It's for the population we serve, and somewhat to our staff, because we want people to know we're focused on success. You've heard the term trail nail in jail. We use that jokingly, because that was the old thing way back when someone comes out of prison, just follow them around, they'll mess up, and you hold them accountable. Well, that doesn't work. That's not what makes our community safer. It's not what keeps families together. It's not what helps facilitate change. So,
Thank you.
thank you for your comments.
Quick question, I guess two things. One, I'm very impressed with the programming that you have, and I just live down the road in Swisher, and you don't hear much about it, and I do appreciate every time we come here and to hear about the positive things that go on here. But I was just wondering, positive programming that you have takes quality employees. Are you having the same problems that the other portions of corrections are having, and trying to fill your positions with quality staff?
Yeah, it's a little bit of a challenge. We don't have the applicant pools that we did before. We're doing a lot of outreach. One thing that we did that was very innovative, thanks to staff here who think outside the box, we worked with the University of Iowa. John Zelke, John, he's the former chief of the Northern District for the federal probation. He retired, he took a job down there, and we were talking one day. He actually went on one of the exchanges with me to Poland one time and did a presentation over there, and we were just bumping around ideas. And he said he could identify students that were more than interns for us, because we wanted them to be able to have the status of a staff member, to be able to step in and fill a shift, not just kind of be that person that was learning, but that person that was doing. And so the University of Iowa decided, you can hire them as temp workers, and they give them college credit. That's what they do. That's not what we do. We hire them as temp workers. There are 5 of them that him and another professor kind of looked at and said, I think they like this field. I think they'd be good at it based on what I've seen in class. So we hired them here as temp workers and got them interested in community-based corrections. And I think last round they completed, because you can only be a temp worker for so long because of state rules and stuff, which is a whole nother discussion for another time, because we gotta do things differently. We can't stick with our rigid rules about how we hire and stuff anymore, because it just doesn't work. But 3 of them applied and are now permanent employees. So things like that we're trying to do, and I'm so thankful that happened when that happened, because it's kind of got us ahead of the curve on stuff. But yeah, we're just getting innovative. We've never been to so many career fairs and job fairs. We have a law enforcement advisory board. We're probably gonna do some more stuff there. The problem that you have when you bring everybody they see that one person, like everybody wants to grab them. And you get the chiefs together and they're like, you're gonna steal my person training, you're gonna steal them and bring them over here and bring them over there. So yeah, but the next step after we get that going is the initial kind of short-term stuff. Long-term stuff is reaching the high schools and doing some education in the high schools. We've done some guest speaking in the high schools, get people excited about corrections as a field. when I used to teach over at Mount Mercy as an adjunct instructor, I'd always ask the first day before they knew what I did, you know, who's interested in law enforcement? You know, who's interested in being a probation parole officer? Maybe you get one hand, maybe. 50% of them want to be profilers. I had to break the news to them that there's just not that many profilers out there, but everybody watches TV and everybody wants to be the person that says, oh, I grabbed this, I looked at this, I did it. Oh, that person did, you know. This doesn't work like that, so we gotta give a dose of reality, but yeah, we really have to get innovative and we have to look at some of our barriers and remove them for hiring because it just is a different world. You hear about employers out there that are hiring on the spot, you know, where it's hard to compete, but we'll figure it out. We'll figure out. The important thing is getting people through the door that buy into the philosophies that, you know, Laura talked about. That's very important to us. I can teach people how to do pat searches, or I can teach people how to, the soft skills though, the stuff that they really need, that sometimes isn't as easily taught. We need to identify that from the front end and make sure we get the right people in the door working with us because our work is so important. So.
At the risk of stalling out before we get to the agenda, I just want to make one more comment. A couple of years ago, after the meeting, and I don't know if you'll remember the conversation, I had a conversation with you because a friend of mine who's involved with Hope CDA had contacted me and said, you know, it's weird, out of all the people, the offenders, or previous offenders that work with us, we really struggle. The ones here don't seem to be successful and we don't know why. And you said that you'd be willing to talk to them, and then of course that really never became an opportunity. But I was speaking to Ron, I think it's Ron Ziegler, in the last 6 months, and he mentioned that you had spoken with them, and
Yeah.
I just thank you.
Yeah.
I mean, because I saw it as a 2-year gap, and maybe someday
Yeah.
I can. So I appreciate you following up on that, even
Yeah.
though I didn't think that'd be a possibility.
No, it's just, there's a lot. I mean, we're very fortunate right now. When I talk about the employment realm, back when I first started, our halfway house was on 3rd Avenue. Everybody went over and worked at Hardee's or McDonald's. I mean, that was just the quickest job they got. It was within walking distance. And then we realized that's not really effective. You know, some people, there's nothing wrong with being an employee there, and some people make a lifetime of it, but not all our people. And so then we started figuring out ways to get people in other types of employment that better match their skills. And we say to those employers, can we use you as an example when we talk to other employers? And back then they didn't want to be, because they were afraid to be criticized for hiring felons when there's these other community members that aren't felons that they should be hiring. Then it changed to, yeah, you can use our name and we'll actually tell our story, because when we hire people that have felony convictions, lots of times they come in with a chip on their shoulder and say, I'm gonna prove to you that I'm a good worker and I'm gonna outwork that person next to me. And so we had employers who were actually looking for people out here to hire. Now we're at a point where we're having employers saying, I have a responsibility in my community to hire people and give them a second chance. And that evolution, watching that evolution happen the last 30 years has just been absolutely amazing. So, and if it happened because they just need employees in general, I don't care. Because they will hire them and they will see, just because they have a felony conviction doesn't mean they're a bad worker. They can be a very good worker. Now, if I can get that with the landlord association, I'd be very happy, but that's also been a tough call with them. Because there's no correlation, there's not a correlation with, you know, just because someone's got a felony conviction doesn't mean they're gonna be a bad renter. I think probably their credit report maybe has more to do with whether or not they're gonna pay your rent, which is what's really important to you, but I've had several conversations with them, and a couple of them say, yeah, I really appreciate what you're saying, but I'm still not gonna rent to them. And I'm like, it's really your loss, but we'll keep working on it, keep knocking on the door.
Thank you.
You bet.
All right, here we go. Is it you?
Is it me or no?
It's, I've got the 6th District Sex Offender Program
Oh.
with Dr. Lamb.
Well, I don't wanna cut you guys out. Jeez.
Supervisor of the Sex Offender Treatment Program Unit.
I'm Kathy McGinnis, I'm the psychologist here in the 6th District.
So this morning, we're gonna give you a very, very brief presentation on the Sex Offender Unit, the program and the supervision that we provide when an individual comes to us after committing a sexually based offense. As I said, it's a very brief presentation. This can be a very complicated population to work with. It can also be very complicated in regards to the codes and the laws that apply to this population. So we will start with that. So just to give you kind of an idea of what we're talking about, from a statewide, I think you have this in your packet, but from a statewide average, we'll talk about what special sentences, but we're seeing about 1,600 individuals on field supervision and about 65 in our residential facilities on a statewide basis that are on our special sentence. We'll talk about what that is here in a minute. But looking specifically at the 6th District, which is Lynn, Johnson, Benton, Iowa, Tama, and Jones County, the statistics for that is we have about 384 individuals who are on supervision for a sexually based offense or an offense related to that sexually based offense. That might be a registry violation. About 373 of those are males and 11 are females. So what does that look like when we actually look at what we're supervising them for? We have about 56 individuals who have been charged with a crime, but have not been convicted. So we work with them on the pretrial level, and I'll explain to you what we do specifically with that. We also have 118 individuals who are on a probation status, 109 being probation here from the state of Iowa, but we also have 7 individuals who have come to us from other states. So they are supervised through an interstate compact situation. We have 16 parole cases, 9 from here, and again, 7 from an interstate compact from another state. And we have 186 special sentence paroles. So when I talk about what a special sentence parole within the realm of sexually based offenses, individuals will be convicted of their sexually based offense. A lot of times they'll either get probation or they may be sentenced directly to prison. Following that initial sentence of either probation or to the institution, it is followed by a special sentence. We are the only population that has a special sentence, meaning sexually based offenses have that. And so once they complete their probation status, they will flip to a special sentence parole status. So for example, an individual may be sentenced to 2 years probation. They'll do their 2 years probation, and then they may have a 10-year special sentence to follow. So they'll do 2 years probation, and then 10 years special sentence following that, which is a parole status versus a probation. The other option for special sentence is a lifetime special sentence. And when I say lifetime, I mean lifetime. They are on for the rest of their life, unless they can modify off, which Kathy will talk about here in a minute. So we work with our individuals for a significant period of time. We have them on supervision for a period of time. So the benefit of that is we really do get to know our clients. It enables us to engage with them in those meaningful relationships, as Laura was talking about, and really work with them to what other things can we do to help their situation improve. We also have then 6 work release. 1 individual from CUSO, so that is the Civil Commitment Unit for sex offenders. That is actually through DHS. So if an individual has served their time on their sexually based offense, they meet some other criteria, they are deemed to be more likely than not to commit continued sex offenses, they will go to the Civil Commitment Unit, which is through DHS. Once DHS is determined, as well as the courts have determined that they are ready for supervision in the community, we work then to supervise those individuals in conjunction with CUSO. And we have 1 individual on that status right now and 1 federal client. So the unit composition, so what does our team look like that work with the individuals here in the 6th District? We have 4 probation parole officers here in Lynn County. We have 1 probation parole officer in Johnson County. We also have a probation parole officer for Benton, Iowa, Tama. He does have an asterisk because he also handles some other cases in addition to the sex offense cases, but he will handle them for those 3 counties. We also have 1 polygraph computer voice stress analysis examiner, and also writes PSI, so those pre-sentence investigations when an individual needs a PSI in a sexually based offense. And then we also have 1 psychologist, Kathy, She works on psychosexual reports, modification reports, federal clinical reviews, CBSA, and some low-risk supervision. So the polygraph and the CBSA, as I stated earlier, that's a tool that we could utilize when working with our clients within the treatment realm. So that is the team here that works within the 6th district to provide the supervision as well as treatment. That's all contained within the unit. So they supervise the individuals as well as incorporate the treatment program. So our supervision strategies. As I said, we have individuals who are under pretrial supervision, are also sometimes called release with supervision. So those are those individuals who have been charged with a sexually based offense, but have not been convicted of that yet. So our goals in working with those individuals is we really want them to commit no further criminal behavior, but we also want to ensure that they are not missing court dates. This can get a little bit challenging because sometimes people, when they're charged with a sexually based offense, think we should maybe be doing more and limiting them more. But we have to be very mindful of the fact that these individuals have not been convicted of an offense yet. So we have to kind of balance that. Sometimes the court will order specific things such as they'll go ahead and put them on GPS or some other requirements of their pretrial supervision. Individuals who are on pretrial supervision are either supervised at a level 1 or a level 3. Our level 1s are mostly the registry violations, so they've already served their time, done their probation, are back on a registry violation. The pretrial level 3, we're seeing them more often. We see them a couple of times a month. And those are usually the individuals who are on for a sex or have been charged with a sexually based offense. One of the main things and why we looked at, we kind of changed how we did pretrial supervision with this population. They used to be supervised in a different unit, in a pretrial unit. We switched to have them supervised within the sex offender unit for a couple of reasons. We wanted to make sure that we could talk to these individuals and encourage them to talk to their attorneys. We're not legal representation, but to talk to their attorneys about the special sentence and the registry. We had a lot of individuals initially coming on to supervision. They thought they had 2 years probation and then they were done. And we had to be those individuals that said, oh no, you either have a 10-year or a lifetime special sentence to follow that. So those are things that we really want to work with clients with, to talk to their attorneys so they understand what the consequences are if they choose to enter a plea deal, and what that means for them when they come out then on supervision. We also will talk to them about what supervision looks like, because at least initially, our supervision is pretty stringent and pretty tight, and as we get to know individuals, it'll loosen up a little bit. So our probation parole, what are we looking at? Our goals are we want no more criminal behavior and no more victims. We incorporate treatment. All individuals who come on for a sexually based offense are engaged in our treatment program. We also want to have them learn skills in our treatment program, but we work with them on the application of those skills. So how is that gonna look? How do you incorporate that into your daily life? And then we do have the component where we do need to make sure that they're adhering to laws and rules that exist, both so that they aren't charged with other crimes, but also so we're not creating more victims. So when we do have an individual who comes on to supervision, initially we supervise them at the level 5, which is the highest level of supervision. That gives us an opportunity to get to know the individual, to work with the individual, and that could be up to the first 6 months. We do incorporate the use of GPS, so we know where they are during that first 6 months. And that gives us time to complete our assessments, both our static assessments and our dynamic assessments. So it gives us what risk level they're gonna be at, and then what things we're gonna target more specifically when we get them into treatment. After that 6 months, or up to that 6 months while we're completing those assessments, then after that, we will supervise them in accordance with their risk assessments. Historically, we used to supervise this population at the highest risk in the intensive level all the time. Well, we've learned that not all of our clients are intensive risk or high risk individuals. So we supervise them in accordance with the risk assessments. We trust our instruments and we supervise them accordingly. So we work with various case management strategies. We really want to work to increase those protective factors. How do we get those stability factors in place? And what other things can we do to address those dynamic factors that we know we can work with and incorporate change? The treatment, and Kathy will talk a little bit more specifically about what we do, but we, like I said, we put all of our individuals who come on for a sexually based offense into our treatment program. We do have the ability to, we do virtual groups right now. We have some hybrid groups, and we actually have one of our special needs groups who has actually gone to in-person. We just know that population does better in person versus virtually. We will continue to offer a variety of means to provide the treatment because we know our clients have different needs. As I stated, we also incorporate the polygraph and the CBSA. That's another tool that helps us to make sure that we're providing treatment based upon their needs as well. We then continue to do ongoing assessments with our client throughout the supervision process. So we're both supervising them at the right level, but also so we're identifying concerns that may come up as we're working with them, and so we're better able to address those needs. As I talked about a little bit before, we do have the special sentence parole that is specific to individuals who have a sexually based offense. And so C felony or greater is a lifetime special sentence. A D felony or misdemeanors is a 10-year special sentence, and that, as I said, is a parole status. So individuals who may do the 2 years probation and successfully complete that probation will actually flip to a parole status, even though they have never actually set foot in an institution. It is a parole status, so we work with the Board of Parole on that, whereas on their probation, we work with the court system. So that is something, like we said, we really like to work with our clients at the pretrial level so they kind of understand all of those pieces that will come when they have a conviction for a sexually based offense. With that, I'll hand it over to Kathy.
Okay, so as Mindy talked about, all of our treatment is done in-house here, and the treatment curriculum that we use across the state, not just in the 6th district, is referred to as the Good Life Model. So this is based on the idea that all human beings, not just people who are convicted of sex offenses, but all human beings have areas of their life where they're trying to accomplish things and meet goals in order to have a good life. We refer to those as common life goals or as primary human goods. So it's different areas like relationships, or connecting with your community, or spirituality, employment and leisure, things like that. And basically, the stance that we take is that if you've ended up here in one of our sex offender treatment program groups, at some point you went about meeting one of these goals in an unhealthy way and have room for improvement in that area. So it's very strengths-based. We try and work with the strengths that people bring to the program to try and just find a way to meet those goals in a more healthy, more pro-social way, so that they can stay out of the criminal justice system, so that they can stay in compliance with the rules of supervision and also the rules of the registry, because that puts certain parameters around their life, which we'll talk a little bit more about as well. It is dosage related. You've heard that term earlier, and that means that the length of time that you need to be involved in treatment has to do with your level of supervision. Your level of supervision is based on your risk level as determined by our risk assessments. So our higher risk clients will end up in a primary treatment group, which is a weekly group, for longer than our lower risk clients. Typically people are in the primary group for anywhere from a year to 2 years. So this is not a short-term group. It's a pretty, and can go even longer than that, but it's a pretty lengthy commitment. And then once they're considered to have graduated from the primary treatment group, they go to a maintenance group. A maintenance group meets once a month and is a little bit more, well, it's more maintenance level. So basically when they leave a primary group, they would have what's called a good life plan, where they have kind of all their goals laid out in these areas. And in a maintenance group, they're gonna check in, how are they adhering to their good life plan? In what way in the last month did you do something that meets your good life goal for your spirituality goal, or things like that. People are given credit for treatment time they have in prison. So if somebody does their treatment in the institution and come out to us on parole, we do take that into consideration when we look at dosage. They may go straight into a maintenance. They may need to do some more primary to kind of boost some of their skills. We look at that on an individual basis. So the sex offender registry, we've referenced this a couple of times, and I want to talk a little bit about this. Everyone convicted of a sexual offense in Iowa does go on the Iowa Sex Offender Registry. And they are placed on a tier. So they're tier 1, 2, or 3. Tier solely has to do with their conviction code. It has nothing to do with their level of risk on probation or parole as we determine by our risk assessments. A lot of times when people look at the public site and they see somebody as a level 3, they are like, oh gosh, they're super high risk. And it's apples and oranges. It just has to do with their conviction code. The only thing it means is how often they have to update with the registry. So they either update yearly, twice a year, or 4 times a year based on their tier. People on the registry have to keep the register up to date on their, of course, address, first and foremost, but also where they're working, their internet identifiers, the vehicles that they are driving ever, even if it's something they only occasionally drive. And they have to keep that information up to date in between their scheduled times to go in as well if there are changes, but at the minimum they have to go in that once a year, twice a year, 4 times a year. We also expect our clients to adhere to requirements of other states and jurisdictions registries. So for example, if somebody is on an Illinois registry because of a case they have out of Illinois and they move to Iowa, we expect them to stay in compliance with Illinois as well as whatever they now have to do in Iowa. Also, if people are traveling, so this is something that we don't often think about, but if one of our clients wants to go out of state for, a week, say spring break, we expect them to do their homework and their research ahead of time about wherever they're going and what the registry requirements are in that jurisdiction, and then adhere to them. And that might inform some of their travel decisions as well. It's different everywhere. So some places, there are states where if you sleep there 3 nights in a row, you have to register in that state for the rest of your life. So we expect people to find that out and take that responsibility upon themselves before they are traveling at all. As Mindy mentioned, people are placed on the registry. Well, I think you mentioned that. You might have said about special sentence, but you're either placed on the registry for 10 years or for life. So those are your 2 options. There is a registry modification process. So I'm going to talk about what that looks like today, and I stress today because there is some pending legislation that could change this in the near future. But as of today, to qualify to be modified off the sex offender registry, the Iowa code requires that you have registered for a minimum of 2 years if you're a tier 1, 5 years if you're a tier 2 or 3, that you, by risk assessment, are indicated as being low risk, and that is a validated risk assessment completed here by Department of Correctional Services. I actually complete those for our entire district, and we do both static and dynamic risk measures. So some of our static measures are more based on factors at the time of the offense, where the dynamic measures really take into account what's happening today, how stable their life is in this moment. They have to have successfully completed sex offender treatment. They have to not be incarcerated when they apply for modification. And then if they are on probation or parole at the time they apply, our district has to stipulate, meaning our treatment team gets together and ultimately decides, do we support stipulation? Do we support modification off the registry for this person? Because then our director has to sign off on that if we do, as a district, support that. So actually, if somebody is on probation or parole, that's where we start. Because if we're not going to support it as a treatment team, they don't need to go further with the process. The one thing I always stress too when I'm working with people on modification is that it is not our role here at the district to say if we are recommending modification off the registry or not. It is our job to say if they meet the code requirements. One of the important pieces then to, I think Mindy kind of mentioned that if somebody is on lifetime parole, it really does mean lifetime. Well, the way things are currently, you cannot be early discharged from parole if you're on the sex offender registry. So that's why the modification process is so important, because if somebody is on lifetime lifetime registry as well as lifetime parole, they would have to modify off the registry before they could even pursue an early discharge off parole. And we'll talk a little bit more about some of the reasons that matters. Some of the challenges then with being on the registry specifically have to do with legislation. And so I already talked a little bit about some of the travel restrictions and how that adds just a different layer of responsibility when our clients want to travel somewhere. But the child endangerment law in Iowa, the way the child endangerment law currently reads is that if, as a parent, if I were to allow my child to be unsupervised in the care of somebody who's on the sex offender registry for anything, regardless of the age of their victim, I can be criminally charged with child endangerment. Also, the way that DHS sees unsupervised means that if they sleep in my house at night, if this person on the registry is sleeping in my house and we're all asleep, that is unsupervised contact whether I'm there or not. So if you think about that, that means that somebody who may be 10 and 15 and 20 years past their violation, past their offense, and still on the registry, and maybe now they have a partner who has a minor child, they can't live with them. They can't spend the night in the same home with them. Also, for some of our younger clients who are 18, 19, when they're charged and convicted, what if they have little brothers and sisters at home? And maybe it would be totally appropriate for them to continue to live at home with their parents at this stage of their life, but if they have minor children in the household, they can't live there because now their parents risk a child endangerment charge. So it really adds a layer of complication to things. Excuse me. The registry also presents a lot of challenges when it comes to finding work, finding things to work toward in their life. If somebody is on for a lifetime, well, even 10 years, I mean, you know, if you're in your 20s and you hear that you're on supervision for another 10 years, some of us are beyond our 20s and realize it goes faster than you think, but it sounds the same as lifetime at that point. So it really makes it difficult for our people to be incentivized to do the right thing and to really hang in there and try and stay offense-free so someday they can modify off, because someday sounds so far away. Housing is a huge issue for our sex offender clients. Even if they don't have a 2,000-foot rule, it's very difficult to find places for them to live. A lot of our clients aren't able to purchase a home, and they do depend on a landlord who's willing to rent to them. And like Bruce mentioned earlier, landlords are already hesitant to do that for people with a criminal background. Now, if you also add in that their address is going to show up on the sex offender registry, it really limits their options. If they are under the 2,000-foot restriction, meaning that they cannot reside within 2,000 feet of a daycare, a school, there's some other caveats to that, but those are the big ones. It makes it even more difficult. And you've probably seen some of the maps of different towns where if they map out every place that is not 2,000-foot compliant, that's the whole town. Or maybe there's one tiny area that leaves 2,000-foot compliant, and maybe there aren't any rentals there, and that's their only option. So it's very, very limiting. And one of the pieces of that too that people don't always recognize is that that's only where you live. So if I'm on the registry and I have a 2,000-foot restriction and my mother's house is next door to a daycare, I can actually be there all day long and be compliant with the registry. I just can't stay there overnight. And when are the kids at the daycare? During the day when I'm hanging out at mom's house. So it kind of, it provides a little bit more of a false sense of security than anything else. The other big issue that we have run into and will continue to run into as our clients are on lifetime supervision and lifetime registry status is end-of-life care. So categorically, care facilities, assisted living facilities, they won't accept somebody who's on the registry. And many people at the end of their life either don't have family who would care for them or who can care for them. Maybe they're not medically appropriate to be cared for by family and they need the assistance of a facility. They don't have that option if they're on the registry. Most visiting nurse associations won't even go into the home to care for somebody if they're on the sex offender registry. So it's extremely limiting, and it really leaves a big gap in our population as far as end-of-life care. And that's everything I have. I don't think I've ordered my finger. Are there any questions for us?
I have a question. I guess, you know, is this a program that you guys developed independently, or is this a program that's based on something that's been used in other states successfully, or is that a combination of both?
So the Good Lives model, we switched to the Good Lives model, 4 years ago? I think about 4 years ago. We actually we were utilizing an old curriculum, and we realized that things probably have progressed since that time, and we needed to relook at what was most appropriate to working with our clients. And so a statewide committee, there's a statewide committee that I do participate in, and we looked at that from a statewide stance, and then evaluated several of them and decided on the Good Lives model. It was the most promising for that, as well as the most appropriate for how we deliver treatment within the state of Iowa. So as a state, we all utilize the Good Lives model both in the prison and within all the CBCs. So if a client would go from 6th district to 2nd district, it's the same sort of curriculum, and so that would be able to go with them, and they'd be able to kind of slide right in.
Okay, and then I know Sarah, with her number, shows all kinds of things. Have we looked at how successful this program, it sounds like it's been in place for 4 years, so it sounds like there's some numbers that would be out there that we could gather. Are we seeing success with this program since you changed over?
So we are actually engaged in a research study with Creighton University to look at that. So you also have to think if individuals so we switched about 4 years ago. Individuals are in treatment from 1 to 2 years, and then you want some time to follow them. So we're actually just getting to the point where we're able to maybe even start kind of looking at, has it been successful? Because if we have 4 years ago, they took 2 years to complete, we're only technically 2 years out for those initial people that were in. But like I said, we do have a partnership and that we are working with them on a research study to look at exactly that.
Okay. And as far as the housing issue, I know 2 or 3 years ago, I worked with Jerry Bartroff, and we had a committee that was put together to study the housing issue for people as they aged. And we made a report to the legislature, and the legislature just sat on it and did nothing because it was gonna be too cost prohibitive to put together a unit or something to take care of the issue. So I'm aware that is a real issue and becomes more so as you have aging prison populations and things. So, any suggestions beyond what we suggested a few years ago to the legislature as far as how you do that?
It's a matter of really needing a resource, needing a nursing home that's willing to have individuals who are on the registry or who have a sexually based offense in their history, being able to work with them, or even landlords who are willing. We have a few, but a lot of times it's very limited in the number of apartments that they might have. The other piece is sometimes they are not the best living situation for our clients, and so those are things we also have to think about. For example, Cedrell, it's an old motel. It is out on Highway 30. So a lot of our clients live out there, specifically the ones that have a 2,000-foot restriction, because it's pretty much one of the very few options that they have. The difficulty with that is there's no bus service out there. They're very isolated from other resources that they need. It would be beneficial to them. So while we can find them a housing situation out there, we're not able to do some of the other pieces, even struggling with coming into their office appointments and things like that. We have learned to use virtual options, but still we do want to interact with our clients on a face-to-face basis too, so.
I would also add that in relation to the aging population too, one of the things that we know statistically is that the further away a person is from their offense, the lower their risk is to reoffend. So the longer they remain offense-free in the community, statistically, the less likely they are to reoffend. So when you do have people who are in their 60s and 70s and 80s who haven't offended for 10 and 15 and 25 years, you can interpret their risk differently despite even what it was at the time they were convicted.
Understood, but all it takes is the one situation
Absolutely.
like Pomeroy to throw the whole thing in.
Yep.
One reading.
With this population, I mean, like with Minnie and her staff are monitoring the legislation out there, anytime they make something more restrictive, people aren't gonna change it. So we feel like sometimes all we're doing is trying to not make it worse. It's bad, we just don't want it to be worse. And so a lot of the laws that have passed, we're aware of, is knee-jerk reactions to something that happens. You know, what if we just do this, that case would never happen. Well, that case might still happen, but it makes people, I think, feel like I just wish there's more research behind it, before they made the change, because you can't undo it. It's one of those things, you ring the bell, you really can't undo it, because no one's gonna go and propose reducing restrictions for sex offenders.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
This is an issue that was brought up with when Governor Branstad was still in office, and he said, oh, there's a nursing home that's gonna take care of this, that they're interested in taking care of this population. Well, that never developed, and it's
Thank
just,
you. Yeah.
nobody ever has a solution to it. It's
Yeah.
just-
we won't give up, but
Yeah.
they fight hard, but, you know,
Yep, I'm aware of it for a long time.
yeah,
Yeah.
thank you.
I have a question. How do we get the public the information about child endangerment with the parents, you know, with the family members, with whomever may not know that their family member is a sex offender and they have children and now they're in trouble with the law? Do we have commercials or any type of radio commercials going out saying, hey, be careful who you allow in your house because this could happen to you. You could be in jail and then you could lose your kids. So how do we get that information out to them? Have we thought about that at all? Have you guys thought about trying to get it out to the public?
Well, not so much the general public, but what I can say that we do with our clients who are on probation and parole, if they have anybody in their life who they are wanting to have contact with a minor child, they have to get permission from us. And the permission consists of the biological parents of that minor child actually giving us a notarized statement after speaking with us about the child endangerment laws, saying, I understand what my responsibility is here, I understand the law, I understand the risks I'm taking, and I still am okay with this person having supervised contact with my child.
Okay, so you contact the children's parents.
Yep.
And
Yep.
then they have to sign something saying,
Yep.
okay, I'm willing to take this opportunity.
Yeah, and we do that for all of our probation and parole clients for any minor contact that they wanna have, regardless of who their victim is, exactly because of that law.
Because that's kind of scary.
Yeah.
You know, because I may have a nephew or niece or someone that come over and need a place to stay for a couple nights and
Right.
end up, I might lose everything, you know, so I think it's good to get a review on the people that they're coming in contact with.
Yeah. We agree.
Can you explain a little what a special sentence involves?
Sure, the special sentence parole, honestly, as far as the rules that the client has to follow is not significantly different typically than their probation rules. It's really just a status change, and it becomes more of an issue if they do have to go back to court if they have any violations or anything, because we report more quickly, we report to the parole board. But it's all the same sorts of things. They have to stay in compliance with the registry, they have to maintain employment, maintain stable housing, stay offense-free. What am I missing? Those are kind of the big ones.
So it's the same thing, just a change in
Yep.
status.
Yep, and that's, when I have a client that's rolling over to a special sentence, that's how I explain it to them. Like, if there's anything different we're gonna require of you, I'm gonna go over it with you really carefully, because occasionally the parole board will throw in a condition that we have to be really mindful of with, usually has to do with minor contact, actually, when that happens. But otherwise, it's all the same rules. Just keep doing everything you're doing. You're just, if you don't get in trouble, you're not ever even gonna notice it's different. That's how I explain it to them.
And for the lifetime people, in your experience, what are they doing for work if it's so hard to find employment? Or who's supporting them if they're not working?
Well, it depends. I
We
mean,
have a variety of,
yeah.
we have everywhere from individuals who work at fast food restaurants to, we do have a client that's at Rockwell Collins. So I mean, we kind of have the full gamut. We have clients who have pursued, education and have done very well. So we have individuals who struggle. It is more of a challenge, obviously, with the sexually based offense on their record. We try to work with them on how then to go in to a job interview and how you might want to approach it with a potential employer or a potential landlord. A lot of times the landlords or the employers don't want to feel like it's a surprise to them, so we work with the client on how to best present that situation. And a lot of times it talks about, yes, I did commit this offense, here's what I've learned, here's what I've gained, here's what I have to offer. So really kind of addressing that and how to put it in the best light possible. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Now you're being Ubered.
Sorry to jump the gun, guys. Good job.
I hope you explain it a little bit.
Oh, I will, yeah. All right. Well, good morning, everyone.
Morning.
just wanna say before I get started, in terms of my updates, just how proud I am of the 6th District. I mean, outstanding job they have done. And, you know, this is my home, as you guys probably remember. This is where I started my career as a probation intern and as a residential officer, and then Bruce is my direct supervisor. He was terrible, but it was fine. No, he was a great leader. He was a great supervisor. Worked with Mindy, and what they're doing is they're just leading the way. I mean, there's like 3 words I think of. I think of innovation, I think of leadership, I think of strength-based, and that's exactly where we need to be. So, just wanna say how proud I am, Bruce, of you and your team, and the work you guys have done. You guys truly are leaders in the field, so a couple updates. So I think I'm gonna switch and no longer do COVID updates. It's been 2 years. I know you love to hear our COVID numbers, but they have declined tremendously. We're very low. So unless you are opposed to it, pretty much at this point in time, unless we have a huge spike or something, I'm not gonna report on them anymore, if you guys are okay with that. We'll get into the meat and potatoes of things. All right, so one thing I do wanna share, about 19 days from today will be the anniversary of the murders at Animosa, of Bob Mcfarlane, Lorena Schulte, and the hostage taking of Lori Mathis. This t-shirt I'm wearing was a t-shirt that was developed after the murders, and you'll see a lot of staff wearing them, and that's showing that we stand together. There are families, their families are our families. We've been through very difficult times together, but we're also seeing a lot of hope amongst the staff. There's a lot of healing still going on, and we'll go on for years, but we are stronger together. So I want to wear my t-shirt today, so Chair Williams, that's where that comes from. With that, coming up on the 23rd, we're going to do several things. So on March 23rd, across the state, we're going to do a moment of silence. We're going to lower the correctional flag as well. Animosa will be holding a memorial service that day as well. And so we are going to honor our staff that lost their lives, and we're gonna also honor their families and the staff at Animosa and our communities, because corrections is one big community. So I just wanna make you aware that that's coming up soon. With that, I also wanna thank Sally Kramer. She has been a liaison to the Mcfarlane family. Jennifer Gile has been for the Schulte family, and they have become part of their families. And they have been, since day one, supporting the family, their needs, helping get organized on things, helping, I'm gonna talk about in a second what's gonna happen in May, but have truly been amazing supporters of those families. So I just wanna thank Sally. Jennifer's not here today, but thank them for all they've done. It's hard, it's challenging, and we care about those families, and so we wanna make sure they get taken care of. So that leads me to, we've been working with Iowa Cops, who's been very helpful after the murders in terms of getting funeral arrangements, things set up like that. So right now, Sally and Jennifer and a few of us are working with cops to prepare for the Fallen Heroes Week in May 11th through the 17th. So what we'll be doing is we'll be going out to DC, and their names will be put on a wall. And so I'll be going, as well as I think Sally's going, Jennifer, and of course the families are going. So we will honor them in DC with their names on the wall. So we're preparing for those, working on logistics and things like that. So just want to make you aware of that. Also to do with that, kind of transitioning a little bit, is that we had a sergeant from Des Moines PD do basically a webinar for us. And he's the president of the Iowa Peer Support Foundation. And he basically provided like a 2 or 3 hour training that staff could watch, that we recorded for staff that couldn't maybe get off their posts or things like that. And he basically it was an amazing webinar. And what he covered was how to reduce first responder suicide, reduce family discord for staff, have the first responders survive and thrive during retirement after you're done doing the job. It was well done. I think it hit all the right notes. I think we have to continue to support our staff. This is something that's gonna take a lot of time to heal, but again, we're gonna keep providing those types of opportunities for our staff to help them, deal with the tragedy, get the support they need so they can still have good, happy lives outside of corrections. So we again, record it, and we'll be sharing that with, any staff that wants to see it. So, last Wednesday on the 23rd, I presented to the Justice System Appropriations Subcommittee, and just, did our normal presentation with the status quo budget, talked at a very high level about the CGL report, some of our changes that we've made, as well as what we're doing on recruitment, retention, population management. I think it went fairly well, and so we've done our presentation, so that's behind us now, and I know Nick is gonna talk more about legislative stuff here shortly. We also had a call on February 25th with the Council of State Governments Justice Center. We're engaging them with an oversight committee on justice reinvestment. So basically what this is we're the first one in the country to do this, is basically look how we responded to the pandemic, and what are the things with the bipartisan multi-branch committee, say what are the things that we wanna change, what are the things we wanna keep, what are the things we wanna get rid of, modify. So we're gonna be working with the Council of State Governments Justice Center to see what are some of the good things that came out of the pandemic in terms of the changes in our strategies and our practices that we may wanna keep moving forward. So we'll be working with, we have legislators on this committee. We have some of the directors, we have local court stakeholders, we have the governor's office, we have the ACLU, housing providers, so we have a lot of partners on this committee, so I'm very excited to see where this goes and see what we can do to help continue to improve the system. Also this week on Monday, myself, Randy, Sally, Brian, Steve, Joanna met with ASME, and we met with Rick Eilander, who's the president of ASME now, who's taken over for Daniel Homan, and some of the presidents from all the prisons. We basically they had a list of things they want to talk to us about, recruitment, retention, leave, things about the pandemic, changes we've made. So I thought it was a really productive meeting between us and the union. We'll probably continue to have those meetings when necessary, but again, I thought that was a great success, coming together again, trying to improve the system together as a team. So, and this week and last week, I presented to Drake twice. I presented to the Justice Reform Force, and then, I don't know if any of you are familiar with our Ollie at Drake. It's like these people are on lifelong learners. And so it was really great. It was a really great, interesting presentation. We had a lot of questions about corrections and our philosophies, and I gave them a lot of data, of course, to their eyes were bleeding, but very successful. And I think that's part of the work that we need to do in corrections, and it's part of our recruitment and retention, is educating people on what we do. It's like the one person in the criminal justice class, they say, what do you want to do? And everyone raises their hand, they want to be a law enforcement or a profiler, but I gotta be honest, Bruce, I want to be a profiler. I was that person. But we want to get people excited about, corrections, what it means, how you're serving your communities, how are you're a public servant, getting people excited about our work. And I think it's our responsibility as directors and wardens and administrators to get in front of those kids in high school, those kids in college, and say, it's a career, And so, and I think that's something I think it's something we must do. And so I did that the last couple weeks. And I think finally, I will be participating in the planning committee meeting for the summit on Iowa courts, response to mental illness on March 7th. I will be a speaker when they actually have the summit, but it's a bunch of stakeholders together talking about how we best can address mental illness in the communities, and be able to make sure that we can shore up the services necessary to meet the need. So I've joined that committee and been a part of that. So with that said, that's all I have. It's a little bit shorter than Bruce and his group. So I feel like if I could stretch it out an hour and a half maybe, but any questions for me at this point? Larry?
No, I know you're disappointed. I could ask you about the COVID numbers, but no, I'm not.
If you turn to your right, that person right next to you can tell you. No, they're pretty low, they're pretty low right now.
You're
Okay.
fine, you're fine, no.
I always expect at least one, that's fine.
Well, I do have a question.
It's
Since
like
you're
I talk-
pressuring me.
It's like I talk you into asking me a
Well,
question.
since you're pressuring me.
Sure.
And it was brought up in the previous presentation about the housing issue,
Yeah.
you know, and we did do that report. You know, I spent time up at the legislature and convinced some people that we ought to
Right.
pass some legislation to get this program looked at. We did the report. Has there been any follow-up with this issue? I know
Yes.
back then we looked at housing out of state and all kinds of things. Is there any follow-up on that at
Yes.
all within the department?
Yes, to your question, yes. We actually dusted off the work that you guys have done. And, Dr. Greenfield's been really good, and he's not here today unfortunately, but, Dr. Morris is here. That's a serious issue for us in terms of people that are leaving that define them housing. And so we've had some conversations, with DHS. We are still having conversations about out of state. There are actually some places, around surrounding states that actually have, opened up homes specifically for like people that have, criminal records or sex offenses. So there are places around us that we.
I think
can send-
Minnesota has it. Doesn't Minnesota have some?
And I believe, correct, and Dr. Morris might not know this, this is Dr. Morris, by the way. We have sent people, a few people at least away to some of these facilities, haven't we?
Yeah, I can't remember myself either. I think there's been at least a couple that have went out of state to facilities, yeah, but yeah, you're exactly right,
It's a challenge, and so it's on the radar, and we're constantly having conversations like, are there facilities that we can use, that are not in use anymore? How can we partner with DHS, and so those conversations are happening, because as you said, and you hit it right on the head, Larry, is that we have an aging population. We're gonna have to do something sooner or later. We're gonna have to have a good plan. So it hasn't gone completely dormant, but we have those conversations. I imagine once the session gets over, we'll be having more of those discussions. But I appreciate the work you've done on it, because I looked overall, you guys did a lot of work. It's good work.
Thanks.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you. Now Mr. Crawford will give us the legislative update.
You can watch your stuff for you.
Okay, members of the board, thank you so much for being here with us today, and thank you to the 6th District for hosting us. This has been great, so thank you very much. As the director mentioned during her comments, last week she gave the department's budget presentation to the Justice Systems Appropriations Subcommittee. And this week, the final state agency under the umbrella of that committee gave their budget presentation as well. So we'll anticipate over the next, in the coming weeks, that appropriations process will now start to move forward in committee and then ultimately into the legislature. Last time we met, I had mentioned Funnel Week. That has now come and gone, so that was on February 18th. That is the final day in the House and the Senate for most bills to pass out of subcommittee. So if they don't make it past that point, they can no longer be considered unless they're added as an amendment to another piece of legislation. Also, since we last met, this would have been on February 9th, Steve Dick, our financial manager, presented to the Transportation Infrastructure and Capitals Appropriations Subcommittee. I believe he talked about that briefly in our last meeting. But he was able to cover all of our requests for the Rebuild Iowa Infrastructure Fund, along with our requests for the Technology Reinvestment Funds, along with just some of the things that are on our major maintenance list as well with DAS. And that went really well. It was received really well. Steve did a great job. And then I just have a couple bills here to give you guys updates on, things that have moved forward since we last spoke. I believe I had mentioned this bill, it's, the number has changed now, it's House File 2529. It has made it out of committee, on the House side. It is the Psychiatric Residency Program bill, that is being pushed forward. It would add 4 additional psychiatric residency program positions at our Oakdale facility, in Iowa City. Now, not the entirety of the residency would have to be completed at our facility. It has been amended so that those that are part of this program could go out into the community and work with the University of Iowa, and a bunch of other stakeholders. So that, like I said, that is passed out of the Appropriations Committee now, just waiting to see, you know, if that's gonna move forward, in the legislature out on the floor. And then finally, this was a bill that was introduced last week. It's House File 2170. It has to do with IPER's earning limitations. So the way that the law works now, there's a limit for retirees. Once they, if they go work part-time, their earnings are capped. If you pass a certain threshold, then you can't receive the same type of IPER's benefits that you did previously. So the cap now is $30,000. This bill would raise it to $50,000 as the earning cap. And what we've seen is that at some of our facilities, we have retirees in our system that would like to come back and work part-time or help us out in some way, you know, to cover some shifts or whatever it may be. So this could potentially help alleviate some of those issues that we're having with staffing. So following that as well. Keeping it brief, if you all have any questions, I'd be happy to answer.
Nick, I assume we haven't taken any positions on any pending bills.
No, and the way that we approach that as a department is we register undecided on legislation, unless it's one of our bills that we have pre-filed with the legislature. The reason being is because we want to provide facts and be sort of an unbiased voice when it comes to certain pieces of legislation. We have to provide fiscal impacts, we have to provide impacts on our population, those types of things. So when legislators do come to us, they know that they can trust the information that they receive from our department.
Okay. And then I assume the 2 bills you just talked about are subject to the March 18th funnel, the next funnel deadline that's coming up March 18th.
Yep, so that, the House File 2529, the one that I had brought up originally, that's eligible for debate on the floor at this point. It's made it out of committee. That also has an appropriation associated with it, so it had to go
Okay,
through
so
the-
it could go past the March 18th.
It already did, yep, exactly, yep.
Okay, thanks.
Great. Thank you.
We've come to the point in the meeting where we would welcome public comments, and it looks like we have one. I just want to say beforehand that it's our practice that we don't address your comments at the meeting, but we will certainly follow up with the appropriate people in the department to answer any questions or speak to your comments. Thanks.
My name is Larry Smith, and I appreciate this opportunity to talk to the board. Today I'd like to address the visiting that's at the prison levels. Recently, matter of fact, February 16th, Governor Reynolds issued a statement that says that from this point forward, the pandemic will not be a pandemic, it'll be treated just like the flu, in one of her statements. And then 2 days ago, on March 2nd, the CDC came out with a report that 90% of Americans no longer need to wear masks, that only 10% do, and that's usually the ones that have health complications. So there's that. Currently, I think I read a report about a month ago, it was maybe at one of these meetings, that about 80 to 90% of the inmates have been vaccinated and about 58% of the staff. Now, the IDOC policy promotes visiting between the inmates and their families, and promotes that contact of any way as possible. However, currently, the visiting in the prisons has been cut down to, there's like 50% of the chairs available in the prisons. And with that, the levels that were at about 2 years ago as far as visiting have been cut down to 25% or less, strictly because it is a little bit of a thing that you have to do. You have to sign up at least 1 to 2 weeks ahead of your visit, and you have to find a time slot. Now on Saturdays and Sundays, you're able to visit in person, and on Fridays and Mondays, you're able to visit by virtual visits, which I hope to continue because there is a lot of inmates that have family that lives several hours away, if not several states away, that cannot make the visits. However, with the procedures that are in place since the pandemic, and that's now over, my main question is when will this return to normal? Because it does take a lot of resources with the current situation from the staff at these prisons to maintain the procedures that are in place, which are that you have to sign up for the visits ahead of time. That staff then, the week before the visits, somebody has to spend 2 or 3 days ahead of that visits to line up the visits and make sure they're all in place, the people are approved and whatever else they need to do. And then you have the staff that once you sign in, get it to the prison, you have to, of course, sign in and register, which is fine. And then you have a person that physically walks you in a group, because it's done in groups, from the sign-in station into the prison. Okay, now previously, this was you'd come in during the visiting hours and you would sign in at the desk, and then they would call the inmate if they have a visit, and within about 15 minutes you'd go in, but you could come in anytime you wanted during that 10 to 4 slot or whatever the visiting hours were set for that prison. So with the current conditions, it makes it really a struggle, not only for the staff, but for the family to get in to see that inmate. So that's why the visiting is down to about 25% it was of pre-pandemic levels. You know, there's things that then also, once you sign up, now, like I said, you have to sign up at least 1 to 2 weeks ahead of time. However, if you do not make that deadline, let's say you sign up for a 10 o'clock, okay? If you come in at 5 after 10, you don't get in, okay? You're held off until the next group is coming in or out, which is usually about an hour. And then you can have the remaining hour of your visit, because most of the visits, I think, are 2 hours in all the prisons around Iowa. For the physical visits I'm addressing. So you get there 5 or 10 minutes late because things happen. People are driving hours sometimes to get there. You could have a car breakdown, your sitter didn't show up on time, there's something's changed in your schedules, you can come by train, anything can happen between the time that you leave home and the time you're supposed to show up. So, okay, so you're 5 or 10 minutes late, you can't get in to see because, like I said, a CO has to walk you into, as a group, in to see the visiting room. So you can't just come in and go in when you get there. So you're held off an hour later till the next group is ready to go in or out, whichever one the case may be, and then you're allowed in. Well, by that time your visit's half over. So you've driven several hours, I'll just say 5 or 6, and you get an hour visit for that weekend versus your 2 hours, which is short anyway. Now remember, before it was for the higher level inmates, they were 4-hour visits. So that has drastically been cut down from the 4 hours down to 2 hours, and now you come in late, you get a 1 hour. Okay, so then now in a couple of the prisons, they've started this new program called, and I'll see if I pronounce that, Emilio, which then you have to, if you have a smartphone, you have to take a picture on your smartphone of your driver's license front and back, and then take a picture of the driver's license, you holding it with your so they can see your face, so it matches your license. Then you send that in, and it's almost like another pre-approval situation that goes on when you first register in order to see an inmate in the prison, okay? So you're really starting your whole process all over again. However, not everybody owns a smartphone. So the people that don't own smartphones cannot sign up. So I know they're struggling with that in a couple of prisons they're trying with, and they're having a lot of difficulties with that situation. So I don't know where that's gonna go exactly. Now with, I don't feel that any of these current regulations promote the IDOC policy of providing a lot of contact between the inmate and the family. To me, they're a detriment right now to that situation. And kind of my question is whether you're going to address it today, later, or if you address it in another meeting, that's up to you. That when will these kind of sanctions be lifted or gone back to the previous type of visiting, and not only get more contact with the family, but also lessen some of the stress and the duties on a lot of the staff that, to me, are just kind of using up their time without much productivity. The other thing I want to address is the volunteers. Currently, volunteers are exempted from the prisons, which means the religious leaders, AA groups, social workers, all those are exempted. So I'm wondering, since the pandemic's over, according to the governor, and the mask rate has gone to 90% or 10% really, then when will the social workers be, and these type of volunteers be allowed back in the prisons again? Because that was a very good support line to a lot of inmates that don't have any family. And there's a lot of them that don't have any family come visit, period. They've just written them off and they don't come visit. The other thing I wanted to address, something that Beth Skinner said, was the shirt she's wearing, Stronger Together. A very good idea in the thought process. However, what I've seen is it's actually detrimental to the prison. It's gone to where that the staff wear the shirts. Stronger Together. Does that Stronger Together, I never could understand. Does that mean just the staff? Or does that mean Stronger Together, the inmates and the staff? You know, they mentioned the 2 murders at Animosa, which is just the worst thing that ever happened. However, the inmates were affected with that just as much as the staff or anybody else. They knew those people just as well as the staff did. So a lot of them were just as torn out about that as the staff. So they got the shirts Stronger Together. So the inmates have no opportunity to obtain those shirts. If it's Stronger Together, meaning inmates and staff, then it should be inmates and staff. It shouldn't be staff against inmates. The inmates take it as it's inmates against staff, or staff against inmates, whichever way you want to put it. We're 2 groups. I think the Stronger Together should be all together. That's my opinion, my observation. The other thing I've noticed is that there was a report last meeting that there's approximately 8,100 plus inmates currently in the Iowa prisons, okay? And that, which is 16% over capacity. Now, this is no way critical of what the Corrections Department presented this morning. Not being critical, their programs do an excellent job as far as I'm concerned. However, in that report, the person who gave it said that there's going to be, the population in 2030 is going to be 9,300. Now, if we're doing all this, if the Corrections Department is doing all this to have the people complete the programs, then there's got to be some other avenue to lessen our prison population, or we're going to be in the same thing as some of these other states where they want to build new prisons. Because you cannot, if you're already 16% over capacity at 8,100, how much capacity are you going to be over when you get to 9,300 in the same prisons? So that's just something I wanted to bring up and address to the to the board. I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Next, we have open discussion between board members if there is no other public comments. I see none, we'll move on to board discussion. Hearing none. It's at this time that I will make a motion to close the session, and I would ask any visitors or press to leave the room at this point while we enter into our closed session. So I made the motion.
I don't think the chair should make the motion, why don't one of us make the motion,
That's fine.
and I'll make the motion.
I'll second.
Having a motion and a second, all those in favor?
Aye.
And those opposed? Passes, alright. So the close, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
And those opposed? The closed session has now ended.
We have to do the.
Now we have to address it.
Now
I move that we adjourn.
Oh,
I second.
thank you. All those in favor?
Aye.
Those opposed? We will adjourn.